Shifting our focus now, the funeral of Pope Francis is currently underway in the Vatican City as tens of thousands of mourners flood into St. Peter's Square. Several world leaders are taking part in the funeral. They're paying their last respects to the Argentinian pontiff. US President Donald Trump paid his last respects to the Pope's coffin at St. Peter's Basilica. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also paid his final respects to the late Argentinian pontiff. More than 50 heads of state and other dignitaries are attending the late pontiff's funeral today. Indian President Draupadi Murmu also paid her final respects to Pope Francis. She paid homage to His Holiness Pope Francis at St. Peter's Basilica. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had earlier denied that he will be able to attend the event, reached Rome and paid respects to Pope Francis. Ukrainian presidency said Zelensky and his US counterpart Donald Trump also met briefly on the sidelines.
Casa Santa Marta, dedicating himself.
According to the Vatican police, over 200,000 people are attending the Pope's mass funeral in Vatican City. Crowds cheered and applauded as the Pope's coffin was brought out of St. Peter's Basilica. Ahead of the Pope's funeral, prayers were held in several churches across the world. In Rome, several Catholics gathered outside the St. Mary Maggiore as a special rosary prayer. Further, hundreds gathered at Sarajevo Cathedral in Bosnia to pay homage to the late pontiff. As pictures of Pope Francis adorned the walls of the cathedral, in addition, dozens of Catholics took part in a vigil held in memory of Pope Francis in France's Marseille. In the capital, Paris, France's Prime Minister François Bayrou took part in a solemn mass for Pope Francis. Meanwhile, in Greece, hundreds of Catholics took part in a mass to mourn the death of the Pope as well. His death was mourned in his home country of Argentina as well. The pontiff's photo was illuminated on the Buenos Aires obelisk on Friday. Similarly, in West Asia, Christians in Syria and Lebanon mourned the death of Pope Francis by holding religious ceremonies and memorial masses. Elsewhere in Haiti, several Catholics, including the Prime Minister, held a mass to mourn the late pontiff, while Catholics in Ghana observed a requiem mass in honor of the late Pope Francis.
Says our life is a journey. He said if we look at the most painful moments of our lives, loss, even when torn by separation, the conviction arises.
For more on this, we're now being joined by Richard FitzWilliams from London. He's a royal commentator and a film critic. Thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One.
It's a pleasure.
Of course, as you know, the Pope's funeral is underway. It was Pope Francis who helped reimagine the Vatican's rites and rituals and helped simplify them last year. He was the one who choreographed the funeral procession as well. And how do you reckon this reflects on the Pope's life and legacy?
I think there's no question that with the tremendous outpouring of support for him, the fact that 250,000 filed past him in state in the last 3 days in St. Peter's, the fact that 200,000 and also 200,000 people, but also representatives of 170 nations are gathered today in St. Peter's Square. I mean, it's truly remarkable. He was somebody who was able to reach out. This tended to take the form, for example, of the support of those who were poor, those who were disadvantaged, migrants particularly, and also his interest, for example, in the environment. He was hard to categorize because whereas many thought of him as a liberal pope, as opposed, say, to his predecessors, Pope Benedict and also Pope John Paul, on the other hand, he didn't tend to change church doctrine. What he did do was reach out personally, and his personal reach, I think, was absolutely remarkable.
Absolutely. He did want to be remembered as the people's pope as well. In what way? Of course, we know that over 50 heads of states and dignitaries are in attendance as well. And while we talk about his life, his legacy, and the things that the Pope stood for, In what way do world leaders' participation or absence, do you think, reflects diplomatic and religious ties?
Well, there's no doubt at all that countries with the largest Catholic population or percentage in their populations are represented, and also their numerous members of the royal families. Prince William is representing King Charles, owing to the quirk that British monarchs don't tend to attend funerals abroad. But what you've got is an extraordinary example of the fact that the Catholic Church still has 1.4 billion adherents worldwide. And indeed, he visited so many countries, and some of the extraordinary rallies, I'm thinking particularly of the Philippines, but also, for example, in Rio de Janeiro, I mean, millions were attracted quite literally to them. So the countries who are represented certainly represent, so to speak, the Catholic diaspora, but also this is very much a symbolic ceremony for the world, because, whereas, as you correctly say, the Pope was someone who preferred the simple, and he's not being buried, as 90 of his predecessors are, in the Vatican, but in St. Mary Major, the Basilica. And there's no doubt at all that what we're seeing in a setting which is absolutely magnificent, St. Peter's and St. Peter's squares from the 17th and the 18th centuries, took about 160 years to create. And what you have, therefore, is an amazing show for a simple person who nonetheless had a magical touch.
All right. Mr. FitzWilliams, thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One with your insights on this. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift our focus for now. Former U.S. Congressman George Santos has been sentenced to over 7 years in prison. Santos pleaded guilty in August 2024 to 2 of the 23 criminal counts he faced, including federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The former congressman admitted to deceiving donors and stealing the identities of nearly a dozen people to fund his congressional campaign, then using that money on personal expenses, including Botox, luxury brands such as Hermes, and OnlyFans, an online platform known for sexual content. Santos served less than a year in Congress before being expelled in 2023 after his lies and fraud were uncovered. Judge Joanna Seibert of the Eastern District of New York sentenced the 36-year-old to 87 months in prison and ordered him to surrender by the 25th of July. The attorney's office said the judge ordered Santos to pay over $370,000 in restitution and forfeit more than $200,000. The allegations against Santos were first reported by a local newspaper, the North Shore Leader, which accused him of fabricating much of his resume. During his campaign, Santos claimed that he had attended New York University, worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, and that his grandparents had fled the Nazis during World War II. It was later found that none of those claims were true. In May 2023, federal prosecutors charged him with laundering campaign funds to pay for his personal expenses, charging donors credit cards without their consent, and receiving unemployment benefits while he was employed. Santos spent much of his 11 months in office engulfed in scandal, marginalized by his fellow lawmakers and mocked by late-night TV comedians following revelations that he lied about much of his past. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.